Hi, afternoon. I'm Pawarat, Nontasil, and PhD candidate in Department of Computer Science at the University of Bath. Today, I would like to present one part of my research, that is the emotional utility and recall of the Facebook community. I'm also working with Professor Stefan Payne. Today, he is here as well. So let's move to the first one. Many people spend a lot of time of browsing Facebook every day. Why is social media is so compelling to many users? We found many previous study on the motivation of using social media. Most of these can be classed under the first heading is the use and gratification. However, our approach is narrow, grounded in the emotional utility and memory. So let me move to the first one. For the first one, use and gratification, we review the literature in the paper. In this paper, essentially it asks the people why they use the Facebook, what they like about it, and what they get out of it. It goes on to relate the answer to behavior. For example, asking what the certain motivation are statistics associated with the use of a particular function. Let me mention two important early papers in this question. The first one, Lampe and his colleague, study about why do people use the Facebook. They report that students use the Facebook to communicate with the people that they met offline, and also then they were less indicate use Facebook to create a relationship. And another early and influence study is Joyson. They indicate 7 distinct motivation. For the first one is social connection, shared identity, photograph, content, social investigation, social network, surfing, and status update. As to paper, we analyzed that the people use the Facebook because the functionality of the Facebook are more attractive, and also maintain the social relationship. For the second one is emotional utility and memory. Our approach is complementary and very different. Instead of analyzing the different sources of motivation, we take a reductionist decision-making perspective, and also we assume that people are motivated to maximize subjective utility, and then we following Benham and Knowman, sorry if I pronounced the wrong way. We assume that emotion or the emotional variance is a good proxy of utility, and also we ask what is the structure of the experience and remember emotional utility of the Facebook use, in particular in terms of the reading the new feed on the Facebook. Some existing study support our approach in the broad term. Again, just to example, the first one, they report that the Facebook users spend much more time just reading the content on the Facebook, rather than post, share, or any interaction on the Facebook. And another one, we also found that the people have got a mixed emotion when they're browsing the Facebook. And also, we want to answer some question. For example, how emotion utility is explained while browsing the Facebook, and also how emotion utility is remembered after an interaction with the Facebook is. Let's go back to the general question: why is social media so compelling to many users? We scope down to the research question: how retrospective summarize judgment of emotional utility affected by individual news feed on the Facebook. Therefore, as this research question, we want to understand the retrospective summary judgment of the emotional utility. In particular, we wish to test the peak and rule as a model. So what is the peak and rule is? The peak and rule is a snapshot model of the remember utility. This model suggests that the people can remember the remember utility depend on its two parts. The first one is the peak emotion utility, and the second one for the last emotion of an experience. We test this theory to explain the emotion utility of the reading new feed on the Facebook. So let us move to talk about the method of this study. The method of this study consists of 6 main phases. For the first one, each participant was invited to browse the Facebook around 10 to 15 minutes. Participants could quit browsing the Facebook at least 10 minutes, but not over 15 minutes. And also, with their consent, their screen will record during browsing the Facebook as well. After they finish that one, they will did Facebook research questionnaire. It was taken around 10 minutes for each person. And after that, they will rate the overall of the emotional experience for the browsing Facebook, just only that section. And then they were required to recall every single thread that they seen on the Facebook during section. Once they complete the memory task, they will look back to the screen, the recording, and list what the thread that they forgot. And then after that, the screen record is what released because we're concerned about the personal information for each participant. And so at this point, we will switch the presentation to Steve.
Thank you, Em. Okay, so the data that we're left with after this experimental procedure then is a list of Facebook threads, that is the status updates and their conversations, in order, or at least tagged with their serial position that each participant has seen, and an emotional rating of each of those threads on a scale from -10 to +10, reducing all the complexity of different emotions to a single dimension. We also have, of course, the initial retrospective rating of the entire Facebook browsing time period. And our main interest is in trying to predict that retrospective rating by looking at the memory for the threads and the judged emotional valence of the threads, of the individual threads. This is some general descriptive data about the study. 39 female participants and 14 male participants were recruited from the University of Bath staff and student body. During the experiment, they chose to spend about 11 minutes 40 seconds browsing Facebook. We asked them to browse for at least 10 minutes and choose when to quit in the next 5 minutes, because we thought it important, for reasons you'll see, that they chose the final experience that they had, the last thread that they read. On average, they read 28 threads during that time, and when trying to recall those threads, they could only recall, on average, about a third of them. Most of the threads, when rated in the almost final part of the experiment, were rated as having a positive emotional experience. And so was the overall experience of browsing for 10 to 15 minutes. 49 participants reported an overall positive emotional experience, and only 4 a mildly negative experience. Okay. So let's turn to the main findings. I suppose the primary hypothesis was that the peak-end rule might apply in this situation, as it does to other extended episodes of emotionally varying experience. So the way you test that is to look for each participant at their peak emotional experience in terms of which thread had the highest emotional rating, the end emotional experience in terms of the rating of the last thread they encountered, and you use that to predict that overall, what we call the overall retrospective emotional rating of the episode. And the result is not spectacular, but it's interesting. About 20% of the variance in the overall rating can be predicted just from the rating of two threads. That's a better prediction than you get from the average rating across all the roughly 25 threads they rated. So that's, I think, supportive of the general principle of the peak-end rule, which is that the peak experience and the end experience are doing a lot of the work. One obvious parallel between the peak-end rule as a theory of how emotion is rated retrospectively, one obvious parallel to that is standard results in the psychology of memory. The recency effect in serial recall, and the what's the right word here? And the better memory for more emotionally valenced experiences. Both of those phenomena were observed in our experiment. If you look at the serial position effect, we did this by looking at how successful people were at recalling the first, second, and third thread they encountered, and the last but one and last but two threads they encountered, compared with the middle section, however many that was for those individual participants. And this is a graph of the classic serial position effect, a recency effect, a primacy effect, and depressed recall in the middle. Similarly, the other sort of foundational phenomenon is that memory is better the more emotional an experience is. And the way we tested that, I think there's a couple of ways we test that in the paper, but the way I'm going to report here is that we looked at the emotional ratings of remembered threads versus forgotten threads and found that they were indeed both more positive and more extreme. Final, a null finding I want to report, because one of the things that we've left implicit in this presentation so far is that our overall approach here is really an information foraging-like approach, assuming that people are trying to maximize a currency, in this case, emotional utility, and that therefore, when they decide to quit an episode of an experience, that might be governed by that currency. Perhaps we reasoned in advance the local quit decision will be accompanied by a decrease in emotion. But we didn't find any evidence for that, which I think feeds into our general picture, as I'll try and mention as I come to this final slide. This is preliminary work, I think. It's the first experiment in his PhD, so I don't want to make too big a claim for it. I want to say that I think there's some positive findings here that emotional utility might be one way of looking at why resources like Facebook are so compelling. I think it's a very different way of looking at it than the way of asking people what they like about things and listing all the functionality and all the behaviours that they're pleased to have supported. It's a way, I suppose, that tries to take a general psychological model and see whether it applies to this circumstance rather than analysing this circumstance in terms of the descriptions that people might offer. I suppose our sort of speculative summary feeling is that perhaps what happens is that people manage their emotions as they go. They quit at relatively attractive moments, and therefore their memory of Facebook browsing episodes is relatively positive. it reflects their peak experience during that episode. If their memory is what's determining their next behaviour, then the distortion in their memory that is underpinned by the peak end rule explains to some extent why, in prospect, the browsing experience might be favoured. Thanks very much for your attention.
Take two questions from the audience.
Thank you for your presentation. I have a question that kind of like appeals to the general researchers that work with executive computing. You use arithmetic means for calculating, means and standard deviations of emotional utility, or like how people rate emotions. How do you account for subjectivity of that experience, right? Because a 10 for me might be a 7 for you, and so on and so forth. How do you account for that?
Well, we don't. As I said, it's an obviously very reduced, very reductionist approach. People are using a scale. I imagine that there's some shifts in the way people use that scale. I completely agree. And it's not only going to vary person to person. It's clearly to some extent a convenient fiction to assume that all positive emotions can be treated in the same way. But it enables us to ask the question that we've asked. I completely understand why why you'd like to ask other questions.
Thanks for the presentation, very interesting research. I want to ask a question regarding to, I noticed that in your result, it's kind of 10% of the people, but most of the people have positive feelings after reading Facebook, but still around 10% of them still feel kind of a negative mood after they browse the browse to Facebook.
It was fewer than 10%.
Could you repeat?
Yeah,
Could you repeat a little bit?
Okay, so
No, put the microphone.
Steve, I will do, but it hasn't finished yet. The question hasn't finished, so when it has, I'll repeat it.
I just have a word. Should I repeat or should I?
No,
just
carry on.
finish your
Now,
question.
I'll
Just
speak.
finish your question. So I wonder, do you have any observations or assumptions about what caused the difference of the different experiences of browsing in those feeds, and also, do they have any characteristic of remembering memories? Do they have different styles in remembering and forgetting different methods of memories?
Good question. The question is, what about the 4 people who reported an overall mildly negative experience? Do we think there's anything special about them as individuals? And do we notice anything different about their memory for the threads? And I'm afraid to say that the answer to both questions is no. I doubt there's anything special about them as individuals. I think it's more likely to be something special about the particular 20 minutes experience that they've just had. But I don't have any evidence for that, but that would be my speculation about that. And we don't find any patterns in the data in the memory data that identify them. But thanks for the question. I'm sorry it's such a wet squib answer.
Okay, so I think the time is well up. So